Hey, good morning, afternoon, or evening, good people, wherever you are, wherever you happen to be, and however we're together. Thanks for being here. I'm Dave, and this is Dave's Head. So, what's in my head? We exist in a time where every single day it feels like something ridiculous is happening in Washington, D.C., or from Washington, D.C. But this past Tuesday was election day. Not for every state, not for everywhere across the country, but in certain key states. And Democrats dominated election day. And it gave a glimmer of hope, a glimmer of progress in a way that there's this fading of Trumpism. A wave of Democratic victories across key states signaled a renewed public resistance to authoritarianism. Woo! I can't get it out. Um, you know what I'm trying to say. Authoritarianism. There we go. And political extremism, and this blindness or allowance, if you will, acquiescence, SAT word there, to what's happening in DC. Even this week, we have case in front of the Supreme Court testing whether the power of tariffs is uncontrolled or should be uncontrolled in the hands of the president, or if it should be in the hands of Congress, where most people think it should be. Now, in the shadow of all this with the elections, and again, there was the governor of Virginia, the governor of New Jersey, the mayor of New York, Prop 50 in California. I think the mayor of Detroit, first black woman, congratulations to her. Even it was even collateral damage to, I think, the brother-in-law of the vice president, who got obliterated in his race. I think he was running for mayor in some town in mid north central United States. I mean, he even caught shrapnel, right? But in the midst of all this was this shutdown, which I think we're almost day 40 at this point, which it's historic because it's the longest government shutdown in the history of this country, history ever. And it's crippling vital services. It's stretching working class Americans thin. We can't even get TSA to operate fully at this point, which is scary if you think about it, because it's just opening cracks everywhere in security if you think about it. All while the White House remains idle, while the House of Representatives just doesn't work, just doesn't work. Farmers, right? And we've talked about this before. Farmers who they're not going to say blindly back Trump, but they back Trump. They're now pleading, begging even for bailouts so that they don't lose their farms because of these tariffs that have been put in place by this administration. And I think, $40 billion to Argentina now. Right? And just a side note, the next time that someone says, we can't do this because we can't afford it, just add up all the money. And let's not even count wars, right? And military. Let's exclude them. We spend more than our next 27, 28 countries or something like that. Look at all the different things that they find no reason not to spend money on, right? Bailing out Argentina, a country that has its own problems that should have been resolved so they didn't have the situation. Billions and billions of dollars in tax breaks. Billions spent on things like a new ballroom, new planes. There's literally nothing wrong with Air Force One right now, right? But we have these contracts with Boeing. I think it's Boeing. All this private jet stuff that's happening where you got cabinet administration officials flying around private jets for personal things, going to soccer matches and going to events and parties and just spending. You think it doesn't cost all this money to fly all these cabinet members all around the country, all around the world, really, if you think about it. There is plenty of money for that. That's not cut off during the shutdown. But there's irony in this as well, right? The GOP is small government, small government, right? But they continue to demand these massive federal interventions to fix self-inflicted wounds. We want money, and potentially, right? Potentially there were checks going out to combat inflation, right? Because if you listen to Trump, if you follow him on Truth Social, right, you would think this economy was booming. There's nobody struggling. Prices are just in the toilet. You go to the market, you go to the gas pump. Are there big savings there? Is your dollar still going the same distance? It's not. He even talk about, elections again. I know I'm a little all over the place right now, but there's a lot that happened this week, right? Voter ID laws passed, I believe, in Texas. This voter ID thing has been one of those wedge issues like illegal immigrants that are just using people to possibly get some votes. And I encourage my audience, as I always do, to look this up and challenge me with facts if you have facts to combat the facts I'm about to bring to you. Election fraud, as it relates to IDs, is less than a tenth of a percent. Less than a tenth of a percent. I think we have about 350 million people or something like that in this country. 10% of 350 million people is 35 million people. 1% of 35 million people is 3.5 million people. 0.1% is 350,000. It's less than that, right? I think I did my math right. 350, just take a zero away, right? 35, take another one, it's 3.5, take another one, it's 350,000. Now, any fraud, just like any abuse, right? Just like any crime, just like any negative, we don't want. So why doesn't the GOP rush to fix their people from being fraudulent? Because again, look up the statistics. An overwhelming majority percentage of the fraudulent election crimes across the board have been found to be Republican people. Whether it's fake electors, ID fraud, fake ballots, just again, I encourage you to do the research. But these voter ID and illegal immigrant issues are being used simply to just get votes. He actually stated out loud the other day that when you go to the grocery store, you have to provide ID. So why shouldn't you? And the implication is, why shouldn't you have to present ID to vote? I went to the grocery store this past weekend and I did not have to provide an ID. And I can't remember ever having to provide an ID at the grocery store. Now, the exception might be if you're buying cigarettes or alcohol at stores, grocery stores. Sure. Here's the thing. I honestly don't really care about IDs for voting. I really don't. So long as you ensure that everyone who needs an ID, who's eligible to vote, can get an ID. Very simple, right? Whether it's a driving license or non-driving license, because that's the requirement for an ID at this point. So help people get IDs, right? Because everybody needs an ID anyway, because you're so worried about illegal immigrants. So help people get IDs. Help the elderly who have no transportation get IDs. Help the extremely poor, impoverished, who have no money to take public transportation to get to a place where they get ID. Help them get an ID. Because remember, a place where an ID is issued many times is way further away from the house than the polling places you can walk to. Here's the thought. If you're so worried about IDs, the same places that serve as polling places on election day have them create IDs at polling places. You'll ensure that everyone who's supposed to get an ID gets an ID. And you'll ensure that everybody who's supposed to have an ID to vote has an ID to vote. You telling me you can't print IDs? You can't have mobile stations that print IDs, connect to a database to make sure the data is updated? You can't do that? If you're so worried about IDs, these same places that are polling places have government officials go out, people bring their information, certify who they are, take a picture, a machine prints out an ID, and you're on your way. Again, DMVs or official capacities, that might be different in different states. It might not all be DMVs that issue IDs, but places that issue IDs in states are many times over farther away from the house, requiring a commute or securing a ride to get to, than a polling place that's local to your neighborhood that most likely you can walk to or is easier to get to than a DMV. So set that up. If you're so worried about IDs, make it easier for people to get IDs. Right? All you care about is citizens voting, right? Which, by the way, it's federal law that you can't vote if you're not a U.S. citizen. So this whole issue is moot anyway, but let's indulge the concept. Set up polling places as ID acquiring places. Do it, say, 3 months before the election or whatever the voter registration deadline is. Do it a month before that. Boom. Right? That solves a whole percentage of the problem, right? Because then people won't be able to say, oh, it's hard to get ID, because some people view it as an excuse when it's not. It's facts. It's life. People are poor. People are desolate. People are disabled. They can't get to a DMV that's 5 miles away, but they can get to that church around the corner that's a voting place. Right? Because they hobble there every Sunday. And that happens to be their voting place come November. That DMV that's 5 miles away, that's not. Seems like a pretty easy solution to me. But the broader message is America's exhausted. And if you didn't get that message on Tuesday, hopefully you got it by now. Hopefully it's sunk in. And voters seem to be fully engaged in the fight to reclaim or maintain, depending how far you've seen this go in the wrong way, democracy and decency, and getting us away from dysfunction. Midterms are coming up next year, and it'll be key to see if the enthusiasm for change remains. Speaker of the House came out, I believe, yesterday and said that if Democrats take back the House, the Trump presidency is essentially over, which I agree, because then you'll have to actually work with someone. Now I remind you fully that the government is shut down with Republicans in power in the House and in control, I should say, in the House, in the Senate, and in the presidency. Full control, and some may say as well the Supreme Court. Full control of the government, but the government is shut down. Republicans, and people don't want to talk about this because they don't like talking about the nuclear option. Because if you're not going to negotiate, right, let's just think this through logically. I'm a black and white, 1 and 0, on and off type of thinker, right? Republicans want A, Democrats want B. There's no AB there because Republicans are not willing to even negotiate. So there's no AB to be molded and crafted and compromised to get to. Okay, so B is never going to vote for the government to open up because A is not going to come to the table to compromise to form an AB solution. Okay. A still has the power of the nuclear option, which means they can open the government, get everything they want that they're not negotiating against anyway, without the help of B, without the help of Democrats or introducing a compromise that would make it an AB solution. So why aren't they using it? Because this talking point of just going out and say the Democrats shut down, Democrats shut down, Democrats are not voting to open up the government. You don't need the Democrats, buddy. You don't need them. If you want to open the government today, right now, nuclear option, done. So why not do it? You would keep everything that you want, right? You would not give anything of what the Democrats want. You're saying you're not going to negotiate anyway. So what's the negative option? That it's all you when things go wrong? Is that what it is? You want Democrats to help you so you can say, well, the Democrats voted to open the government based on this too, so it's partly their fault? No. You have the power to open the government. You currently, right now, have everything you want because you say this is what's best for America. So open the government. Flip the switch, push the nuclear option. Do it. It will all be on you. And that's what they don't want. Because the problem is, midterms are coming around. Voting cycle, on Wednesday morning, voting cycle started again. And midterms are starting. And so, if you go look at the law, I encourage you, congress.gov, go look at the law that was passed, the big, quote unquote, big beautiful bill, they call it, which is debatable. We won't get into the details. But if you look at the provisions in that, a good portion of the things that really negatively impact people, the big hitter items, don't go into effect until after midterms next year. Because by that point, well, depending on who wins or loses, it's done. And so this is where I say politics and people, what's best for people, don't mix, right? Because if politics really mattered in the positive side of things, if politics really wanted to influence positive things in people, if politics really wanted to be for the people, by the people, and other people, then we wouldn't be playing these games. Politics is all about the other P, which is power. That's all this is about. Republicans want to hold on to their power. Democrats want to take some of their power back. It's nothing has to do with you. Because if it did, we'd pass term limits by now, right? There'd be term limits in Congress. That would be done by now. There'd be universal or Medicaid for all in terms of healthcare, right? Because that's an easy thing. Again, think about the money we spend on other things. They keep saying we can't do it because of money, but we have all this money to throw everywhere else, right? If it was about people, those things would be easy wins. You make sure everyone who needs healthcare gets healthcare, and you don't entrench yourself in Congress for 50 and 40 years like there currently are some people. Nancy Pelosi just announced she's retiring. I think she's 42, 40, I don't know. She's been there a long ass time. And if you go down the list, what have you done for the people? Now, granted, she has some positive things. She has some things that are not positive. I like my politicians more on the positive side. And I think that's where we get lost when it comes to no term limits, because they can just do whatever they want or do nothing, like the Ted Cruz's of the world. What has Ted Cruz actually done for the people of Texas? I will get off my soapbox. But Tuesday was a good day for the republic, for democracy, for people. It gave them hope, gave them belief that there's a chance authoritarianism can be shut down. And as far as I'm concerned, and I had nothing to vote for. My state had no elections. And I was happy to see other people doing what I probably would have did if I was in their place. It's a good thing. Before I get to the last thing in my head, Dave's Head Podcast is now part of the Alive Podcast Network, home of Black Voices, where community, culture, and creatives live. Dave's Head Podcast adds a catalog of over 70 titles available on the Alive Podcast Network and the app for both iOS and Android, as well as Apple TV, Roku TV, Fire TV, all that stuff. Check out Dave's Head Podcast and many others in the Alive Podcast app, the home of Black Voices. The last thing that's in my head, this past weekend, I got fully informed that I was old. What I mean by that, my 30th high school reunion was this weekend. Overbrook High School, West Philadelphia. I think they got a song about it in Fresh Prince, something like that. But there was this nostalgia, this joy of reconnecting with old classmates 3 decades later. And granted, we got, I want to say, less than a quarter of the graduating class there, which I always wondered, outside of obviously you pass away or you move away to a distance that's not, travelable at least, for what you have going on in your life and other things going on in your life. I always wonder why classes don't see 50, 75% of the people who are still alive and, attend these things. Now, it could be life, and it could be, you didn't really have a great relationship with the school. I get that, 100% get that. But it was great to see how friendships evolve. It was great to see how couples from high school are either still together or are together now. Great to share some laughs, have some drinks. Now, granted, I'll say this. I was not cool with everyone I went to high school with. I went to school with 500. We had a debate about this the other day. I thought it was 549. Somebody said it was 529 that graduated with us. It was 5 something 9. It was over 500. And obviously, percentages don't lie. I'm not going to be cool with 500 people where I can see them, recognize them, shake their hand, give them a hug, express love. But there are people I was completely not cool with, either then or now. And I will say it's going into it, and I was on a committee. So, and this is my 4th time around a committee and also my last. I made that very clear that night. This was my last time go around. But going into it, for the first time in a long time, I had a sense of, I want to say anxiety, not really anxiety, because of how strongly I did not get along with specific person or people in my class that I knew was going to be there. And I think part of the reason it went flawlessly for me, I think anyway, but by the way, my ability to ignore people in their face is unparalleled. But I think part of the reason that experience went so well for me is because of my ability to not care about the existence of people who I detach from, whether it's friend detachment, relationship detachment, somewhere in between. And in that moment, I realized I had a job to do. Like, I'm not afraid of the mic, clearly. But I was emceeing as well, the event. And so being in that moment and being on the committee and from the moment I walked in the door, trying to get stuff working and getting laptop and screens and talking to tech people and talking to the manager and, just being in my mode. By the time I walked back into that venue, because I didn't do this in my full dress, I had to go back to the suite and change. But by the time I walked back into that venue, I was in my Dave mode where I didn't really care who was there. And not in the sense that I didn't care who was there, but who I didn't care for. I didn't care who was there that I didn't care for. And so I went into my enjoyment mode where I'm enjoying seeing the fruits of myself and the committee's labor turn into this night, where I'm enjoying being in the moment of emceeing. I'm enjoying being in the moment of engaging with people I've seen recently and haven't seen in a while. And all those things, and granted, enjoying some of the drinks as well. But in the moment, those 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever it was, and you count, set up 5, 6 hours. But in that moment, just enjoying the fact that 30 years later, almost 100 people who we all were connected in that moment 30 years ago and went spread apart, and now we're coming back again 30 years later and the points are in the same place. Enjoying being in their presence was something that really distracted me from the fact that there were people who were there that I didn't care for. And hearing people tell us repeatedly how great of a job the committee did and sharing laughs and taking pictures and even after party afterwards. I didn't stay there that long, but there was an after party afterwards as well. But beautiful thing, beautiful time. But serving on the committee for the 4th time, it offered a fresh reminder of how leadership and teamwork outside of work can still stretch you. And I've talked before about being a part of multiple organizations, multiple committees, doing things left, right, this and that. And how you and my fiance, T.O., will concur that you've got to have a measured approach to how much you commit to so that you're not stretched too thin. Because being stretched impacts your personal life, impacts your personal health, impacts your relationships, your circle, all these things. And Rivers Casino, which is where it was at in Philadelphia, it brought the right balance of fun, elegance, seeing classmates enjoying themselves made the effort and stretching worth it. However, fourth time's a charm. And the timing of things that are going on in my life, things that are hopefully going to be going on in my life um, over the next year, 2, 5, whatever the next reunion is, whether it's 5 or 10, I probably will not be that engaged as far as the planning side of things. I'm going to pass it to whoever wants it. But there's a bittersweet aspect to it that, we had I started a moment of silence, a 30-second moment of silence. It was a 30 years, so I asked for a 30-second moment of silence. And it was to remember and celebrate and honor and recognize those that we had lost over the past 30 years. And what's interesting to me is there are names that I knew and there are names that I didn't know. But I never thought about were just how many. Because I asked, if anybody wants to say their names out loud, feel free to say their names out loud. And when you got to hear name after name after name after name and put them together, it's, again, 500 plus members. And so we're talking 10, 15, maybe that were named in that moment. That's still a lot because out of that, say 10, 15, I probably personally knew and had varying levels of relationships with well more than half of them. And so 30 years is a long time and a lot can happen in 30 years. And so there's a sense of gratitude as well that one, I'm still kicking because I could have been one of those named in that moment of silence. But there's those who I have relationships with that are strong since high school that we have so many stories we can share at any point in our life. There's the personal growth that I've had, the personal growth I see and witness in others since those, very teenage years going through Overbrook High School's 5 stories of hallways. And so I'm just very happy that those who came enjoyed. I'm also happy that all the planning over the past year plus, I don't remember when we actually started this planning, all that planning led to what was a really great night. And that, there's a renewed, and this thing, listen, this always happens with reunions. You have a reunion, everybody's fired up for like a week or two. Oh, we got to do this, we got to get together more. And then people go their separate ways for another 6 months, 8 months. And then the group pops again. Hey, where you guys at? We're supposed to get together. And so hopefully there's an opportunity here where this excitement turns into something, where there's smaller get-togethers throughout the next couple of years, and those who want to stay in contact, stay in contact. It's a beautiful thing to see. Number one, I'm not the only one that's gray, which is good, but also to make some contacts with people I was not that social with before, but because of my position on the committee, that they wanted to connect with me. And they know I golf, so they see me on social media. They know I got a podcast, so they want to talk about that. And so it's good to make those connections with people who I technically was not really associated with, different programs. We didn't cross paths like that, but they know me because I went to Brook and they went to Brook. It was good to see, amazing to experience, and just a pleasure to, get through it and have such success. That's what's in my head. Matt Melvin's story is one of pain, redemption, and self-realization. A deeply human story of surviving trauma, confronting personal flaws, and finding light in one of society's darkest places, prison. His book, Bullied Behind Bars, a gay Christian Trump supporter goes to prison, doesn't just explore crime and punishment, it exposes the failures of empathy in our justice system and in ourselves. You can check out his work and advocacy at bulliedbehindbars.com. He is a trauma survivor. Matt, welcome to Dave's Head. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. So your story is intriguing. And before we get into it, I do want to make a note that I reached out to my audience because the dynamics of your characteristics are interesting. And so I asked my audience if they had a question for you, and I got several questions. I told them I'd pick one. I actually might pick two because there were a couple of really good ones in there. We'll get to them later in this interview, but I'm happy to have you. Dynamic topic. So I do want to start with, as I always start with my guests. I gave a small intro about you, but take a moment and tell the people who you are, what you do, and what you're about.
I was born in Lowell, Massachusetts. I had two neighbors, one that bullied me, Brian, and then I had another neighbor, Tim, that had an in ground pool, and he was my best friend growing up. So I was sort of in this dichotomy with this bully next door and then my best friend to the lived behind us. I was constantly bullied throughout childhood, and then my parent decided to move up into Vermont. My father got a job at Franklin County Home Health as a director. And in 1988, we all moved up. And it was the biggest mistake my parents could have made because it's very isolating in Vermont. There's not a lot of people, and it's very hard to make friends. And even coming up to Vermont, I was still bullied. So it didn't really change, it only exacerbated coming up into Vermont. In about 2004, I worked at a car dealership. They didn't pay me my commissions. So I impulsively decided to try to sell one of their cars. Got caught, went to court. The mental health court, I could have gotten in, but Judge Jeffrey Crawford and Bob Wolford both decided I didn't meet the criteria, even though I've seen about 20 or 30 therapists in my whole entire life. Instead, and if I came out successfully, I may not have a record today, but instead I went through the regular court, had a background, and then came out and couldn't find a job. So in about 2009, I used somebody else's information at a job site I was working at to pass a background check. I did the work, but I used somebody else's information. The government pursued me for about 6 years, and they finally indicted me in May of 2016. And I spent 18 months in federal prisons, went to about 10 different prisons, and that's where I wrote my story. I did the same thing as Anne Frank did during World War II. I wanted to chronologically share my story. And that's what I did. In one of the facilities, I was raped. In one of the facilities, I was actually put in solitary confinement because the inmates would lie to the guards and tell them I tried to proposition them.
Wow, that's a lot. So before your incarceration, what was your understanding of justice, rehabilitation, and how did that understanding change? And you just gave a couple examples. I imagine they'll be part of that. But how did that understanding change once you were behind bars in your experience?
My understanding prior to 2004 was that the justice system did its job and served its purpose. And that is not my understanding and my belief at all, based on everything I know. And it's not, Dave, I want to just emphasize this. This is not just my opinion. I have talked to two people, independent, have no affiliation with me, that have served on juries. And one of them told me that a juror told me, hurry up, let's find this guy guilty. I got to go back to work. And the other man said, hurry up, let's find this guy guilty. I got to go to a hockey game. So as a defendant, it is a huge mountain to overcome for 12 independent people, and I'm going to make a judgment, and I that may or may not have any experience dealing with the criminal justice system. Because you have to remember that anybody who serves on a grand jury has none, no criminal record. So I hate to make assumptions, but at least I would say a portion of those. And I'm not going to assume anything because, when you assume, you make a you-know-what out of me and you. But I would say at least several of those people have had no experience with the criminal justice system. And there is nothing scarier than being a defendant and having somebody cast judgment on you, whether it's a judge or whether it's 12 members of a jury. There is nothing scarier in life because you have none, no control out of their decision. and they are making their decision based on what the government has presented to them, but they only present things that will help their case. They won't share, like, for example, before I went to prison in 2016, I was volunteering at the Ronald McDonald House for almost 2 years, and as soon as I was indicted, I was removed from that position. So of course the government is not going to tell the jury that I was volunteering at the Ronald McDonald House, because that doesn't help their case.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, anything exculpatory, they're technically supposed to in the grand jury, but I think right now we have a case going on right now with the Supreme Court or federal court, I forget which one, where there's an accusation that exculpatory evidence wasn't presented. But so you write candidly in your book about being bullied and assaulted in prison, raped in prison. You talk about the strength to get through that and what state of healing you are in your trauma.
Well, it's not just that I was bullied constantly behind bars. I was also bullied by many, many prosecutors, judges, a former police chief, who I believe was the reason that I was targeted so heavily. And actually, in August of, I'm sorry, not in August, I can't remember exactly, sometime in 2022, he was given a $200,000 payout, Aaron Noble, to go away from the town of Shelburne. And there was no other information about what was done. So it was clearly a conspiracy. And clearly a lot of injustice was going on while this individual was police chief. I believe that trauma will, you can't end trauma. You can do things to help the trauma. And I wrote my book to help with the trauma. I journal to help with the trauma. I pray. Jesus is my Lord. I had a near-death experience in August of 2015 and came to know God and believe that God is the answer to everything in my life. And then I started doing men's work, and that's really where the healing really, really happened, is sharing my experience with other men at a weekend where we're getting, to the deep core of that trauma and exposing it. And seeing that other men, well, they may not have been in prison like myself, they are still, some of them are living in a prison in their head. And to me, when I was locked up, I was not, they had my body, but they never had my mind. They were never able to take captive of my mind. And to me, if somebody has captive of your mind, they have complete control. And I think it's worse.
Now, I think that, and this is an assumption right here. We're talking about assumptions and assuming, but society as a general assumes that justice, quote unquote justice, ends at the sentencing, right? Being through this prison system twice, what do people still misunderstand about what happens after prison?
That my criminal record never goes away. It's to me a death sentence, and it is an inhibitor in everything that I do, whether it's a job, if I want to adopt a child, if I want to own a gun, if I want to serve on a jury, going through the shorter line at the airport. All of these are inhibitors for me living a lifestyle that I should be able to do.
Yeah, and I've been through the justice system in a much smaller way. Never went to prison or anything like that, but my experience in the court system is similar to yours in the sense that a judge or a jury, that feeling of helplessness, the feeling of not getting a fair shake, bias in a place where justice is supposed to be blind, right? But there's biases, everyday biases that govern decision making and rulings. And one of the things that I took from my experience is just because you have the facts on your side does not mean the outcome will be what it should be. And it's the old notion that life isn't fair, right? But when we're talking about people's lives, livelihood, their future, you speak about post-prison and the impacts of that and the limitations that you have. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions on how we can make justice actually blind?
I personally think the existing system needs to be gutted. It doesn't work. It never has. There are two very different judicial systems, one for the very rich and one for everybody else. And to me, what we need to do is have an independent system that is not overseen by the government, because the government cannot handle anything. Everything the government does is corrupt. Everything they do is mismanaged. But in reality, it's never going to happen. I mean, I'm just calling a spade a spade. We, I know in Scandinavian countries, the system is much better because people who are caught committing a crime are sent to an island. They can't leave, but they still have all of the. They don't lose anything. I mean, they're not able to leave the island, but they still have a phone. They still can get on a computer. They can still see friends and family. So they're not cut off from the outside world like the system that exists in this country. And don't get me wrong, there are certain offenses that somebody should be cut off from society, and those are only violent crimes. Non-violent crimes, they shouldn't be cut off from the world. But I also want to emphasize that there has to be a limit. If somebody continues to do the same thing repeatedly, then they have to put a stop to it. For example, drunk driving. Drunk driving is very, very dangerous. It endangers many, many people. So there has to be a limit. And I've seen in many, many cases where drunk drivers are 6 or 7 times. They're continuing to do the same thing, and they're not getting punished.
So, speaking about the prison system still and justice, just looking at hindsight, the decision you made with a stolen car, and break it into 2 parts: the decision you made and how you would look back on that, but also the indictment side of things and how you defended yourself, and just all the ways that everything that happened in court. Is there anything, I mean, obviously the decision with the car you probably would change, but is there anything specifically you would change about how you went through that process?
No, I wouldn't change. I mean, ideally, I would have liked to have gotten into the mental health court, because if I completed it successfully, I may not have a record today. So that would be the ideal, but it is what it is. So I can't change anything.
So let's shift a little bit. Talk about your faith through this pain and through this trauma, and the trauma continuing today, as you said before. Talk about the role that spirituality played in, be it your recovery, in the process of your recovery, if there was self-forgiveness, if there was forgiveness of the judicial system. Talk about how your spirituality and your faith played roles in that.
In August 2015, I had a near-death experience on 495. I was driving in the middle lane, going 72 miles an hour, which is very slow. I've gone a lot faster than that. When a Lexus SUV came down an embankment and literally crossed in front of my car, but by the grace of God, I was saved. I was protected. And that was the moment that I decided that God was real and He was in control and He was watching out for me, because I firmly believe that if God was not protecting me, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be talking to you. And from then on, I have done the work. In other words, I'm not just talking the talk, I'm walking the walk. And a lot of people, including the Pharisees and Sadducees, they could memorize scripture, they could recite it, but their actions didn't match their words. So we as Christians, we need to be congruent. Our actions need to be congruent with our words. And a lot of Christians today are incongruent. They're not congruent.
No, I 100% agree with that. And as somebody now, I'll admit, not very religious, I'm very spiritual, not religious anymore at this point in my life. I look at those who, as you say, claim, but don't actually act or show, as a big problem in society. I think in many cases, religion is used as a wedge topic or a wedge tool, when it could be used to do so much good in this world. And so I definitely agree with your take on that. How has the public responded to your book? And we can get into your book a little bit if you want to talk in more detail about it. But how has the public responded to your book, looking at the intersections of your characteristics Christian, gay, Trump supporter, two-time prison, because the perception of anyone who's going to prison is much more negative than someone who's never touched a prison at all. How have the public responded to your book given that intersection?
I would say a lot of rejection, a lot of condemnation, whether it's because I'm gay and I'm a Christian, and some Christians, they cannot accept that. They think that it's holy, unholy, but again, until you've walked in a man's or woman's path, you can't judge them. And judgment is for God, not for human beings. So it's amazing to me how quickly people pass judgment. And it's that old saying, before you look at the beam of wood in your eye, the speckle in your brother's eye, look at the beam of wood in your own eye. So people are very judgmental. It's very easy to see somebody else's fault. It's a lot harder to say what I did or my role in the situation. And through doing men's work, I've learned to make I statements. When I do X, it makes me feel blank. That's putting ownership on how I feel in a given situation. It's amazing to me how many people use you, we, they statements, because that removes responsibility and it throws it out as if what an individual does is the way that everybody does things. And that's not true. The way I do things is very different from the way everybody else does things.
So I did mention earlier that I posed a question to my audience and I gotten some response questions to pose to you. And I actually got more since we've been starting this interview. If you don't mind, I would take a moment. I actually was going to choose one, but I actually see two really good questions that I'll ask.
Sure.
The first one is from Alex Wilds Jr. And he says, what does Trump represent for you beyond being just affiliated with the Republican Party? In your eyes, how has Trump and his policies and his character actions been good for you, has been good for the people in all of this country?
I think he's brought people together. He's a charismatic individual. I've listened to him speak. I've worked at his events. It is like no other. Just the enthusiasm going to a Trump event is unlike anything I've ever seen in this country. And I've gone to a lot of speakers. I've seen a lot of events, but there is nothing more enthusiastic and exciting about than going to a Trump rally.
So my thoughts on that would be Obama existed before Trump. Much similar charismatic events up here. They both put on pretty big events, but I think the question was more around how has he actually made the country people better with his policies.
In his first term, he lowered gas prices significantly. That was extremely helpful. He's gotten rid of illegal immigrants. So that is really, really important to me because they are taking away from jobs that Americans could have, and now they don't.
Well, I'd say statistically, Obama got rid of more illegal immigrants, but...
Oh, he did. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But he wasn't targeted like Trump was.
Okay. So second question I saw, which I thought was a really good one, from Amos Leak. He said, what direction is realistic for America based on not compromising others?
I think we need to come together. After the Charlie Kirk assassination, I saw a lot of individuals on the other side making fun of him, encouraging that type of behavior, and it was amazing. The bulk of it came from teachers, which is just abysmal to celebrate the tragedy of a great man. And I realized that not everybody sees him that way, but he was an inspiration to me and a true legend, being 31 and being that smart. I mean, he did more in 31 years than most people do in a whole entire lifetime. He was very, very smart. He was not only gifted in the Bible, but he was also very gifted in philosophy, and he was a very, very good debater. It was very, very hard for anybody to debate him, and I've never seen anybody like that other than Charles Krauthammer, who used to work at Fox. He was another brilliant man, and it was very hard for people to debate him. and he was also an inspiration for me. Charles actually dove into a swimming pool, and he was he was in a wheelchair the rest of his life. And the reason I like him is because he's very smart, and he was a swimmer. So I'm a swimmer too, so I could relate to a lot of what he was saying.
So two quick things, and I have to call you out on this just a little bit, because the beginning of your answer pointed the finger, and you mentioned the words "we," "they," as things were pointing to the other side, and we can look at both sides who have not. I used to say evil parts, very disrespectful parts. I'll put it like that to make it a little easier. If you look at Joe Biden announces cancer, a whole bunch of people on the right celebrated that. Trump even disparaged that, had disparaging remarks about Joe Biden announcing his cancer. The congressman and woman, I forget her name, in Midwest who was targeted and killed. There are many people who celebrated that on the right side. Both sides have bad sides to them. But I do have to ask a question, second question. Dean Withers is one of the people who I think is very smart, young, accomplished, tough to debate. And if Charlie Kirk hadn't been killed, I would like to see them full live video debate, no notes, just, they're very smart people. Part of the issue I have with the Charlie Kirk thing is there's some, and totality of a person, right? He made some very valid points. He made some very controversial, not very nice points. Had some very not nice thoughts about African Americans, about DEI, associated things that weren't necessarily true with the negative sides of just regular topics like DEI. The airline pilot comments and that commentary comes to mind as one of the things that was very disparaging about black pilots. How do you reconcile the negative side of Charlie Kirk, as interpreted by a lot of people in this country, with what you perceive as intelligence, debatable, accomplished? How do you reconcile those things?
I've never heard him say a negative thing about anybody, and I've listened to a lot of his interviews. So if you have a specific interview or quote or something he said, you can feel free to send it to me. But it's very easy to pontificate and come to conclusions without listening to what somebody actually says. The other thing I want to point out that I think is very, very important, and it's very easy today with AI to distort what somebody actually said to what somebody wants them to say. And so we have to be careful of that. So I want to hear from his mouth rather than from an AI robot. So to me, AI is evil. There is nothing positive about AI. It's only confusing people and causing a lot of chaos.
Well, two things. I'll start with the AI part, and then we'll go back to Charlie Kirk's quote. I've been in technology for 30 years, getting old. But what I'll say is any technology, whether it's AI, if you think about Windows operating systems, when they first came out, they were nice and clean. There were no viruses. It was Windows 95 or whatever it was. And the more technology advanced, the more people, again, evil people in this world, find ways to exploit things intended for good purposes. AI has very, very good purposes. I use AI a ton, not only with this podcast, but in life. But there are people, I just saw an article, I read tech blogs way too much, but I just saw an article the other day where essentially the first malware was discovered in AI. And it's because someone's sitting somewhere in a room, somewhere coming up with the ways to do this stuff. And they actually discovered it because they tried to upload it to antiviral websites where you submit samples and discover viruses. It was actually captured and found there because it was self-correcting, it's self-rewriting itself. But so AI as a idea is positive, just like Windows, just like Mac iOS is positive, but there are people out there who will utilize that code and that technology to turn into evil things. The Charlie Kirk thing, I would say the quote is around DEI and how airlines went from having 15% of minority black and brown pilots, and their goal was to get to closer to 50%. And Charlie Kirk, in that context, stated that if he saw a black pilot, he'd feel some type of way about that black pilot being qualified because of a goal. And so you can just research it. It's a very long.
I'm familiar with
segment.
that, but So I think it's important that everybody, it doesn't matter the color of their skin, they have to be qualified. So I
Absolutely.
don't care whether the person is blue, green, purple. If they're qualified, then they should do the job. But I
Absolutely.
don't think we should race bait and try to force a certain percentage of um, each minority to appease a statistic.
And I think my counter to that would be a goal is simply a goal. The reasonings behind the goal are the reasons behind the goal. And so you can set a goal of getting from 15% to closer to 50%, still making sure that everyone that encapsulates that 50% is fully qualified. And so
Right.
that's
But I guess
where,
my question to you is why a goal of 50%? Why are we trying to get to a certain number?
so
That's my
two,
concern.
yeah. And so if you look, this is where we go back to history and the ability to even apply for these roles was restricted. There were unfair tests. There was tests for black people or tests for non-black people. And so the ability to even be a pilot and yes, we're talking 50, 60 years ago, but the impacts of that still are seen today because there's still a catch up of qualified minority pilots who just haven't gotten the roles or haven't gotten the training. And so part of it is a corrective action to try to give people opportunity. And yes, part of it is try to raise percentages for perception. Um, I'm not really co-signing the perception side of things. Again, you're qualified, you get an opportunity, the best man wins. That's my philosophy. But I think we do need to acknowledge that the reason the percentage is so low because opportunities to even be in that position were not always there. And so there's a catch-up side to that as well. And so the Charlie Kirk thing and wrapping back up to Charlie Kirk, I think when you put the perception out there that just because someone has a goal that they're trying to reach, that they're just hiring people blindly and that you're flying in dangerous planes, which was the implication he was trying to make, that's dangerous because now you're demonizing what the actual purpose for DEI was, which was not to just blindly hire people whether they're qualified or not, but it was to provide opportunities where there weren't before. And that's what doesn't get talked about. DEI isn't about satisfying a hiring quota. It's about giving an opportunity to people who weren't capable of doing that before. So, but we in society we've got to have these honest conversations, and it's so distorted at this point because you got news networks all over the place saying and catering to their their viewer base. You got people who just simply you will never change their minds, and
Right.
you know that goes from parent to child to child to generation, and you have these people who are just misinformed or biased. Right? We talked about bias about 20 minutes ago. That bias can transcend generations, and so until back to the question from Amos about how we move forward, essentially as a society, we got to just have honest conversations about things. We got to start with honesty and facts. If we can't do that, we're never going to get to a place where we can coexist peacefully. But I'll get off my soapbox now. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are we need to start doing our own work. We need to work on ourselves. We need to love ourselves. And we have to show empathy. And I think a lot of people don't know what empathy, they say they're empathetic, but they're not really. And that goes to whether it's on the road and somebody cuts you off, and then all of a sudden there's a car chase between two people. And I've seen this where I was walking down a road and I waved to somebody to get out, move so I could walk. And this individual gets out of his car and starts screaming at me. And this is the anger and hatred is, I don't know where it's coming from. It's coming from people not resolving their issues and not doing the work and saying that they're fine and the whole world is wrong, and it's really sad. Because let me tell you, if anybody has a right to be angry and vengeful and hateful, it's me. But yet I have come to a realization and accepted that, I got to the place where I got because of my mistakes. And so I've owned that and I've released it all to God. Let God handle it because it's out of my control. Because if I walk around like I'm full of hate and resentment, it's not going to help anybody.
Next to last question here. What advice do you have for anyone who feels judged, outcast, um, you know, demonized? I mean, you can go up and down the spectrum because their story, their personality, their choices in life doesn't fit the narrative of whatever the norm is, what people consider normal. And I'm using quotes. You can't see it if you're listening and not watching, but um, whatever that society deems as normal.
There is no such thing as normal. I'm abnormal, and I'm pretty content with that because I'll never fit in a box, which is perfect for me. My encouragement for every person is you have to first love yourself, whether that means standing in a mirror saying, I love you, I love you, I love you. And second is forgiving yourself. Because if you can't do those, you can't move to the next step of talking about what your issues are. And then finding your tribe, finding friends. If you're neurodivergent like I am, finding friends that are neurodivergent. Because if I just have people that are friends that are neurotypical, they won't understand anything that comes to my mind or how my brain functions. So it will be a much more difficult mountain to climb to get them to understand me.
If you don't mind, could you take a second and just explain the difference between neurotypical and neurodivergent?
Neurodivergent means you have your brain function, the way you come to understand things is very different. Whether it's ADHD, bipolar, autism, Asperger's, any of those diagnoses. But I want to encourage people to not, because it's very easy to try to put somebody in a box. That's what the psychology and the mental health want to do, is when they want to examine somebody, they want to put them in a box. But putting anybody in a box is very, very dangerous because nobody's ever going to fit all of the criteria that goes with that box. So even if somebody's neurotypical, there's still going to be things that they do that are different than maybe somebody else that's neurotypical. So I think first loving yourself, forgiving yourself, and then doing work, talking about your issues. For me, my healing really began when I started doing men's work. Whether that means doing men's work, women's work, seeing a therapist, CBT, DBT, any of those groups, but not doing anything is not the answer. Finding your tribe, talking about what issues are going on, that is absolutely critical. But pretending that everything's okay when it's not doesn't do you or me any service.
No, I like the finding the tribe. I like that description of it because the people you surround yourself are probably the most important group that you'll be associated with in your life. Not the people you just happen to go to work and see, or you go to the restaurant and you see the same people every couple of weeks. But the people you surround yourself with, your circle. I call them my circle. Um, Tribe is synonymous with that. So I love that advice. Talk about what's next for you. Are you going to continue to advocate for judicial or reform? Are you going to write another book? Are you going
I
to
would
speak more? And
love to
talk
be a
about
speaker.
what's next for your book as well.
Anybody watching this has a event or a group that they'd like me to speak to, email me. bulliedbehindbars@gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook, matthew.melvin.5621. Instagram, Bullied Behind Bars, X Bars Bullied. Reach out to me. Email me, bulliedbehindbars@gmail.com. Let me know what's going on. Let me know how I can help you. And happy to talk to anyone and help anyone.
All right, so that's the end of the interview segment with my guests, and now we're going to get to the part, one of my favorite segments with my guests, called First Thoughts. But First Thoughts is brought to you by a live podcast network, home of Black Voices, where community culture and creatives lives. Dave's Head Podcast adds to a catalog of over 70 titles available on the live podcast network and the app, as well as Fire TV and Roku and all the other stuff we're part of now. But both on iOS and Android. Check out Dave's Head Podcast and many others on the live podcast app, the home of Black Voices. Now, Matt, the way First Thoughts works with my guests is I pose a word or a phrase to you to get your first thought. For those not familiar with this, tuning in or joining for the first time, like I always say, shame on you, but I'm happy you're here. Matt, you ready for some first thoughts?
Okay.
All right, first thought. We actually talked about this a number of times, so it's not going to be that hard probably for you to get a first thought around this. But forgiveness. What's your first thought?
One of the first steps to being able to help another person, to love one another person, and it's really critical to trauma. The first step is forgiveness.
Gotcha. And I would say forgiveness of yourself as well as whatever, if there's something external as well.
Well, there's always external.
Yeah,
It's
I
not
would
just
agree.
oneself. It's also other individuals. It's a two-sided coin.
Now, is that forgiveness? Are you able to identify that all the time, what that external thing is, or is that the harder part of forgiveness?
I can always identify my my issues, but it may be harder to identify the outlier. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. Next first thought, and again, we talked about this a lot as well. And I come up with these first thoughts well before we do the interview, so it's sometimes it correlates, sometimes it's completely random. But justice system. What's your first thought?
Corrupt, needs reform.
Gotcha. Okay. And last first thought, which I think is something that people have very varying definitions of what it actually means and how it impacts not only yourself but other people. But freedom. What's your first thought?
Freedom to me means being free to think however you want to think, to be able to say whatever you is on your mind, but doesn't impact somebody else's ability to think or their space. In other words, so they don't feel like you're inhibiting their right to speak as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to say that with me, freedom, liberty, those words synonymous with each other. But the way I look at them is I really don't care what anybody does with their life as long as it doesn't negatively impact somebody else. I mean, you're free, literally free to do something positive or negative with your life. I can't control anyone doing either of those things. I can maybe provide some stimulation or something to nudge a positive side or a negative side, honestly. But what you do or what a person chooses is completely their right, as long as it doesn't negatively impact someone else. Like obviously, if you choose to take a gun and shoot people, that's negatively impacting somebody else's life. But if you choose to rollerblade in the snow, who cares, right? That's something you want to do. So what I started last season was giving my guests an opportunity to throw a first thought back at me to see what's popping or going on in my head. So if you had something, Matt, that you wanted to get my first thought on, what would it be?
What is the most difficult guest you've ever had on your show and why?
The most difficult. Well, I'd say, and I can't think of his name right now. But I actually had him on a couple of times, and it's partly because he was such a difficult guest. He had such very strong feelings about, wasn't anti-woman, and he would argue that up and down too. He wasn't anti-woman, but he was very pro-man in the sense that the woman didn't matter in many cases. He was difficult because I'm very open to all points of view. At the end of the day, I'm not going to tell anyone how to think. But I also want to have an open and honest dialogue with my guests. And at times that was very difficult to do. Strong feelings are very strong feelings. I try to think of things in terms of facts, logic, reason. I'm a Capricorn, that's what we do. But logic and reason lacking in a conversation, or even just simple respect of being able to have a dialogue, those types of things get to me as a person. You could literally hate everything about me. We can still have a conversation if we respect each other. And so, again, I've had them on multiple times because, on camera, off camera, we've had conversations. And the second time around, and the third time around even, were better conversations. But that initial one was very tough to get through. But he was also one of my most popular, controversial guests. Got tons and tons of feedback and response because of the type of personality he had. So yeah, I'd say that was the most difficult, but also probably made me understand his point of view and the polarization that it was a lot more. if that makes sense. Because reading about him, doing my research before an episode is one thing. Talking to someone is completely different. So yeah, I'd say he was Andre Parody pops in my head now. So Matt, I do appreciate you stepping in Dave's head and telling your very intertwined story of pain and what you've done to get through that. I appreciate you because it's very hard for people, especially when you have the intersection you do. If you look at society, look at today, gay is polarizing, Trump is polarizing, prison is polarizing, even Christianity is polarizing because you look at Christian versus Muslim versus everything else. So you got four polarizing things intersecting there. So I appreciate you taking the time and having the courage to come on and talk about that. Before I let you go, as I do with all my guests, and I know you already gave your socials, but are there anything you want to talk about or share? Feel free to do so now.
Every decision I make has both positive and negative consequences. So you are who you surround yourself with. So if you surround yourself with negative people, you will turn negative too. So I choose to surround myself with positive people.
Absolutely. Or as you say, your tribe, I say my circle, we're saying the same thing. Yep. Absolutely. Well, Matt, again, thank you for stepping in Dave's head. And as I've said to my guests this season, may every today be the best day of your life. My favorite segment of my podcast is my GRIN, which stands for Great Reason to Be in Love with Now. I talked in my opening about my high school reunion, my 30th high school reunion, and that during that reunion, while I was emceeing, I asked for a 30-second moment of silence where we recognized, respected, honored those who had passed since our graduation. And it dawned on me while I was preparing for this episode that, now that we're in November, we're approaching the first really major fall holiday as we close out this year. And over the past month or so, I've attended really two funerals, two services for people or brothers of mine in my fraternity, but also found out that a former manager of mine way back in the early 2000s passed away, unfortunately, from cancer. And so first of all, rest peacefully to all three of them. As we get into the holiday season, especially fresh off losing someone you love, the first holiday can feel unbearably quiet, right? Especially if someone passed that you talk to a lot, or they had a bubbly personality. There's things that you think of that they may have said or done, made you laugh, made you cry. And so it can feel unbearably quiet, but it's also a time to honor their presence by maybe even continuing traditions around these holidays or even starting a new one in their memory. And I say this because as we get into the holiday season, there are people who are very big parts of celebrating those holidays who we may lose. They may have hosted the dinner every single year. They may have brought, their famous casserole. I'm just throwing something out there. Or their famous pies. Or they may have always been the aunt or uncle that talks about politics. Or maybe, I don't know, gets drunk every year. Who knows? But they may have been a big part of celebrating these holidays. And it could be as simple as every single holiday you got a quote from them in the text, right? And so finding gratitude and peace during not only Thanksgiving, but Christmas or Hanukkah or, so many holidays coming up, can be tough after a loss, especially right before those holidays. I was at a service last week, and we're talking into November. We are right now. The day before November, October 31st, I was at a service. And so a couple things that I just want to offer that you can do. First is, and I spoke about it already, but having gratitude, right? Just remembering who they are. They're a part of your life. You're a part of their life. And just being gracious and having gratitude and thankful for the fact that you were able to share them with the world while they were here. And so being thankful doesn't mean forgetting. It means acknowledging the love that you had and the love that remains. And I'm assuming and hoping they're the same thing, because love doesn't have to diminish just because someone personally or their life, their body is not here anymore. And so gratitude. But just remember that gratitude and grief can coexist. You can be grateful for the experience and also have grief that they're not here anymore. It's okay. The second thing I say is lean into, and we talked about this with my guest, your tribe. Lean into your circle, I'd say. Lean into the community. And the community can be your family and friends who also knew this person or these people. Sharing conversations, sharing stories, sharing a drink, sharing a dinner, but not grieving alone. It could be friends and family. It could be literally the community. It could be neighbors who knew this person. It could be fraternity brothers who knew this person for me. It could be coworkers if you're speaking about my former manager. And so inviting others, it doesn't have to be at your house. It doesn't have to be something elaborate. It could be something, hey, let's just meet up at I'm not endorsing anybody, Pizza Hut. Let's meet up at Pizza Hut and have some pizzas because our dearly departed friend or family member loved their stuffed crust pepperoni pizza. I can't stand stuffed crust pizza, by the way. Stuffed crust pizza is not for me. But lean into your circle, your tribe, your community, and embrace the fact that, yes, they're not here anymore, but we can still honor them by sharing laughter, sharing tears, sharing stories, sharing a meal, sharing a moment or moments that remind us of the presence we had with them. And speaking of presence, practice that presence. Pause to appreciate that laughter, the smell of food, the sharing of stories, the small sacred reminders of not only the life you had with them, but the life that's continuing without them. The lessons you learned from them, good, bad, and different. The idioms, I think it's called, or the sayings that they had. If they had the funniest laugh or the weirdest sneeze, those type of things. If they did you wrong at some point, it may be a moment to talk about that. Maybe you forgave them. That's a story you just want to share because you guys got through it and came out the other side anyway. Maybe you haven't gotten it over it. Maybe you haven't even forgiven them. And maybe it's an opportunity to talk through it and release it. But being in the moment, being in the presence of them, even though they're not here, through one of those ways. It's a reminder, all this is a reminder that healing when you lose someone is a thing, number one. Losses you need to heal from. There are losses that are, a 2 out of 10, and there are losses that are a 25 out of 10, right? They're off the scale. And so whatever healing you need to do, for the longest time, my very first love and very first loss is my grandmother, who's right above my head right here. If you're watching on YouTube, Spotify video, or the live podcast network, that was a tough loss for me. And that one happened when I was 10 years old. That beautiful woman, my first love, my first loss. That took me time to heal from. And in many ways, I'm still not healed from it. There's still a part of me that still hurts because she's not here. But again, healing's not about moving on. It's about moving forward with love. Recognizing, yes, they're not here, but my love for them has not changed and is unwavering. So around the holidays, if you can, find gratitude in the moments you shared with your loved one or loved ones. Lean into your circle, your tribe, your community to share experiences, share in the loss, even if it's sharing in the grief. Practice being present And obviously not literally present with the person, but present in the moments you had with the person, the reminders of the moments you had with them. Appreciate the moments you had with them. And lastly, healing is not about moving on. It's about moving forward with love. I want to thank my guest, Matt Melvin, trauma survivor, but I would say so much more. And the depth of the intersection we talked about, and all of the experiences that come from that, I'm sure. We could have talked a lot more and more in depthly about each of those individually. And, despite his story, I think we had a good dialogue about some of the more present, current controversial topics out there, including Trump and Charlie, I can't think of his name right now, that was killed. But we have to, and as I said to him, we have to have conversations where the foundation is facts. And that's one of the things I think is a huge problem in this country and around the world. The manipulation of facts and the laziness of people not willing to seek out facts. And I think until we move away from that and move to having conversations rooted and foundationally positioned with facts, it's going to be an uphill battle. But again, thanks to Matt Melvin for stepping into Dave's head. You can find him on Instagram at Bullied Behind Bars, all one word. On Facebook, his handle is matthew.melvin.5621, or just search for Matt Melvin and you'll find him. And on X, at Bars Bullied. As I've done this season, I like to end an episode with a quote. And I thought, as I was looking for this, I thought I wanted to find something that encapsulated not only the topics I was going to talk about, whether it's the topics with Matt, it's the topics I talked about with the election and what this country has been going through and getting through, and then also talking about the holidays and the things that emotions they may rise up because of those. And so I came up with this quote. It's by Helen Keller. The quote goes like this: "Although the world is full of suffering, it is also full of the overcoming of it." All the things we go through in life, every single day. And I challenge you, and listen, I tell people all the time. I told a friend of mine, I checked on her. She had a car accident not too long ago. So I randomly texted her, I think it was a couple of days ago. He said, "Hey, just checking on you." She said, "I'm doing much better." And she asked me how I was doing. And I said, "I'm doing pretty good. Can't complain." If you know me long enough, you'll see and hear my response finish with "can't complain" a ton. It's not that I can't complain. And it's not that I don't want to complain. It's just that if there's anything I want to complain about, I've probably already worked through it, or I'm in the process of working through it, or it's just not that big of a deal to complain about. But I would not be honest if I said that there is not something every single day of my life that I'd have to overcome, whether it's personal, whether it's work, whether it's relationships and family or friends, organizations I'm a part of. Every single day there's some challenge or hurdle to get over and overcome. The thing is, every single day I work through it, or try my best to work through it, to overcome it. And that's all everyone needs to do. This world is full of people and things that create and cause suffering. Unfortunately, we've got to figure out ways to handle things that we encounter better so that we can overcome it. Makes our lives better, makes the lives of people we connect to better, makes the world better. So reunions, forgiveness, and gratitude. All great reasons to be in love with now. That's all for this episode of Dave's Head. If you enjoyed this episode, I'm sure you'll love similar content in the Alive Podcast Network app. Plus, you can support this podcast and enjoy ad-free listening to nearly 100 other Black-hosted podcasts. Download the iOS or Android app, become a member, and experience unlimited access to Black-hosted content week after week. Follow, like, and or subscribe to this podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and or X at Dave's Head Pod, and on YouTube at Dave's Head Podcast. For more information and links to all things Dave's Head, check out our website at daveshead.card.co. Episode premiere on the second and fourth Fridays of the month. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, enjoy life because life should be fun. Take care.